It's Monday night.
I've been in the game a long time. When a catcher catches the ball and it's strike three, you call the guy out. It's that simple, isn't it?
And if it's Monday, it's the knee jerks.
I'm not going to sit here and rip umpires. But you saw what you saw, clearly saw what you saw. I just saw it for the 10th time. Write it and say something once in a while. Have the nerve to say something.
Detroit sports talk with attitude.
Attitude on three. 1, 2, 3. Attitude.
Coming up tonight, will Big Al guess whose birthday it is? Who are the jerks of the week? What will Eno rant about now? The answers coming up next. Two guys who know Detroit sports. The voice of reason, Greg Eno and Big Al Beaton.
It's June 3rd, 2018. That means it's time for the Knee Jerks, Detroit Sports Talk with Eno and Big Al. I'm your co-host, as always, Al Beaton, longtime Detroit-based podcaster and blogger. Joining me is the man you know as he knows a lot of things about a lot of things, jack of all trades, and you should see the size of his Rolodex. It's quite impressive. That is Greg Eno of numerous places on the web. He can tell you where you can find everything about him. Greg, how's things?
Good. I thought you were going to say the size of my Rolex, which that was news to me that I didn't have one. I don't have one. I am Greg Eno, and hey, welcome to our 10th season. We are starting. This is our first episode of season number 10 of the Knee Jerks, and we're thrilled to be able to say that to you. Hope you were able to join us 2 weeks ago for our 9th anniversary show, where we had a whole slew of guests, and we celebrated in style, and we're back to start season 10. No guests tonight, just Al and me pontificating. You can, of course, find me on WordPress, Outer Bounds blog. You can find my hockey blog, which is The Winged Wheeler. Also on WordPress. Follow me on Twitter, at Greg Eno. Follow the Knee Jerks on Twitter, at the Knee Jerks. And our Facebook fan page is facebook.com/the Knee Jerks. And our Facebook fan group, I should say, is the Knee Jerks group, oddly enough. We will be coming at you tonight with mostly Pistons and Tigers menu, because that's what's going on in the world of sports. But before we get to any of that, we're going to play a game we like to call Whose Birthday Is It, Maestro?
We baked you a birthday cake. If you get a tummy ache and you moan and groan and woe, don't forget we told you so. Happy birthday! Happy birthday!
Fire away.
Al, this is a game where we give you a clue or two or three of an individual whose birthday is today in the world of sports, and if you can correct this person within the first two clues, you'll receive a free savings account at First Federal.
Geez, not First Federal. What about Manufacturers Bank? I think it had an account there.
That's my bank. That was their slogan. That's my bank.
Yes.
Manufacturers. This person, Al, I've neglected to have Al tell you where you can find the podcast.
We'll catch up. Don't worry.
We'll catch up, yeah. This person, Al, made his name in the world of basketball. He was born in this state in 1943, so he's 75 years old today. Concluded a pretty darn good playing career in 1975. He had a season or career-ending knee injury, unfortunately. It ended his career at age 32, but he was a phenomenal basketball player who then became a phenomenal coach for the same team that he mostly played his NBA career for. And I will tell you that he was a NBA champion as a player and also as a coach for the same team.
Oh, geez. I'm guessing it might be a Celtic, just for some reason. It's an easy one since they won so many damn championships, and the age range would be correct. 30. I'll try Dave Cowens.
No, it's not Dave Cowens. I will also tell you it's not a Celtic.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, I appreciate the hint.
Get you off the Celtic track, but no, not Dave Cowens. So we'll go with clue 2 in a little bit. But let's go back to what I neglected to mention, which was Al's going to tell you how you can find the podcast.
Yeah, it's been so long since we did a normal episode. We're going to have things out of order. So,
right.
As always, the mothership, go to thekneejerks.net. That'll take you right to our podcast page at Libsyn. That's our podcast host. You can direct download or stream right from the page. As always, you can find us on iTunes. You can find us on Stitcher. Just do a search for the Knee Jerks, Eno and Big Al. Also, we'll be on YouTube. Sometimes it'll be a video of us talking. Sometimes it'll be audio recording of us talking, depending on the headaches we're having of the day. But all these links will be in the show notes. But as always, thekneejerks.net, iTunes, Stitcher, and YouTube, and we'll have links to all of that.
Great.
All right, with that, Greg, let's hit the road and let's hit things running. Lots to talk about the Tigers, but I think there's even more to talk about when it comes to the Pistons. I guess what it comes down to, I think most of the fan bases, and I think a lot of the beat writers are just asking, Greg, what the hell are they doing at this point? I mean, a month ago, we were talking about why it took them so long to fire Stan Van Gundy, give or take, which happened. It looked like he was going to get canned about 2 weeks left of the season when they were going to miss the playoffs. They still waited 2 or 3 weeks after that. They muddled around. They just finally fired GM Jeff Bauer this week. Since his contract was going to run out at the end of the month anyway. But as the things stand right now, Greg, they seem to be interviewing anyone and everyone when it comes to for the GM and coaching jobs. There has been a hire, or actually 3 hires, but all involve supposedly consulting, advising roles. Ed Stafanski, who was actually being thrown out there as GM when all the rumors started, he's a former Memphis exec. He's been an exec all over the league, several teams. He was hired by Tom Gores to be a senior advisor to help with the GM coach search, and it's a 3-year contract, so he's not going anywhere. So you have to wonder if he's actually going to be kind of running the front office. And we'll get into why it's set up like this. He then hired 2 more consultants, a couple of ancient ex-coaches in Bernie Bickerstaff and Jim Lyman. Those are a couple names I bet you haven't heard in 20-some years, Greg.
Yeah, right.
And they are supposedly there to help with the interviewing of coaches. As I said, Jeff Bauer was actually finally fired this week after running all the combine, a lot of the scouting and draft things for the Pistons, which, it's hard to believe that a guy that was literally a lame duck was running all your business. Right now, Greg, beat writers are still saying the team may still be a couple weeks from hires. And the other weird thing is it's entirely possible that the Pistons will hire a head coach before they hire a GM, which if you ask me, I'm sure if I ask you, if you ask pretty much anybody who knows anything about sports, that makes no sense. But that kind of might be where they're going because they're interviewing for both positions right now as we speak.
I don't understand that, Al. I really don't. Stefanski, of course, comes over from Memphis, and he was also in the front office in Philadelphia as well. He's a very well-respected guy. I mean, his resume is pretty solid.
You could make a legit argument that he could have been the GM easily.
Right.
Yeah.
But this notion, as you mentioned, of putting kind of like a cart before the horse, if you will, this tells me a couple of things. Number one, well, it raises a question, first of all, which is what kind of a GM, Al, would come into a situation where the coach has already been selected, or at the very least, the search has already begun, and maybe well into the search by the time that GM comes on board. So that's the question. Now, to me, what that says is that the way I'm looking at it is that it kind of indicates that Stefanski is where the buck stops. He's going to be the new head honcho because he's basically saying, damn the torpedoes. If I want to pick a coach first, I'll pick a coach first. If I want to pick a GM first, I'll pick a GM first. And guess what? If I pick a coach first, that GM that I hire is going to know that this was my guy. And so I think this is a little bit of and maybe it's not intentional. Maybe this is not the way it's intended to look. Mm-hmm. But to me, it looks like a power play by Stefanski that says, I'm because he was given a 3-year contract, by the way. It wasn't like one of these deals where he's like a Ernie Accorsi kind of a guy who just brought in. That was
brought up a lot at first. Oh, he's going to help with the hiring and say goodbye, but no.
Right, no, but this is a 3-year deal. He's got a 3-year contract. So to me, he is going to be the boss of the GM, of whoever the GM is going to be. The GM, it looks like the GM is going to report to Stafanski,
Right.
who the way it's set up right now reports directly to Tom Gores. So that's the way it's looking to me. So I just don't know what kind of an individual they're going to now. That could mean now that they're because the whole scuttlebutt around the NBA is that the Pistons are looking to bring in, which is a good thing, I think, a younger, more up and coming type to be the GM. So in that instance, if you're not looking to hire a grizzled veteran front office guy who, as you indicated at the top of the discussion, would probably ask the same question that you're asking, which is why are you picking a coach first? Right. If you're not concerned about that, then you probably are indeed looking at a younger up-and-coming guy who's not going to, who's sticking his toes in the water for the first time as a GM, so he's not going to have that kind of cachet to say to Ed Stafanski, well, I want to pick my coach because guess what? No, you're a brand new young executive. You'll take the coach that we give you, kind of a thing. That's the way it's looking like to me. There's a lot of different names, more names on the coaching side, of course, than the GM side that at least have been publicly announced.
Right.
But it certainly is if nothing else, Al, this whole thing has been very fascinating. You mentioned it took a long time to get rid of Stan Van Gundy. We talked with Coach Ray Scott a couple of weeks ago on the anniversary show. And we were all the three of us were all kind of a little, perplexed by this whole thing too. But if nothing else, it makes for interesting. The Pistons are, at least they're staying on people's minds. They're on kind of above the fold right now because of this whole situation.
Yeah, there's no such thing as good or bad publicity, just publicity, and that's what the Pistons are getting right now, at least in Detroit, because otherwise they really would be ignored, realistically. Considering it's, other than, the NBA Finals are going on, so everybody's talking about what's going on with the Warriors and the Cavaliers, the Pistons. Good Lord, we wouldn't even give them a second thought. Probably wouldn't even be talking about them on the podcast till the draft came along, and even then it would be just to say, hey, they got a second-round draft pick, they got some guy who might make the team, let's move on. But sticking with the GM stuff, might as well go with that GM search, and that already a couple of very qualified, well-thought-of execs have bowed out of the search. They have withdrawn their names after either being targeted or actually interviewed. Shane Battier, who people just seem to rave about, he's leading the new wave of analytics in basketball. And he is part of the executive team with the Heat. He was interviewed, supposedly did really well, but then backed out. There was a lot of talk that he wasn't ready to work the kind of hours it would take to be an effective general manager. Someone who's running a franchise. It's probably an 80-hour-a-week job, if not more. We see what these guys work. Another person who pulled out of the search was Rockets Vice President of Basketball Operations, Garrison Rosas, I believe it's pronounced. Rosas. He, another well-thought-of exec with a very well-run team, a championship-caliber team. He also withdrew from consideration. I don't think he interviewed. I believe he was just being targeted. But what's being thrown out there, Tayshaun Prince, that came out of the blue. I never got the vibe that he would be an executive type when he was playing with the Pistons, but he has been working with Memphis, which leads to the ties to Stafanski. Right. Also thrown out there has been Brent Barry. Why, I don't know. He's never been behind a bench or in the front office. He's a broadcaster. He's just a very experienced ball player and broadcaster. And I think the leader in the clubhouse, so to speak, is another well-remembered college ball player anyway. He did play some pros, but he's really making his name in executive ranks, and that's Trajan Langton, who's the assistant GM of the Knicks. Those are the type of, these are all younger guys, probably early 40s at this point, who are well-known in these circles and are thought to be up-and-comers, and the type of young up-and-comer, as you mentioned, that the Pistons are aiming for. I mean, these guys make sense, but it also kind of bothered me that I think the guy I really would have liked to have seen, Battier, just because of his analytics acumen, backed out. That kind of has me worried a little bit, why you would back out when you have a chance to become a general manager of an NBA team. But right now, look at the names they've thrown out there. Langton really seems like the guy I would target at this point.
Minor correction, not minor. It's a significant correction to what you said. He's assistant GM of the Nets, not the Knicks.
Nets. Yeah, Nets. They
both stink.
Yeah.
But Langdon, all signs are pointing to Langdon. That's true. But, which, of course, he would fit that profile of the young up-and-coming executive who's thought of very highly. The Battier thing, Al, I mean, he's a very cerebral, as you know, a very cerebral guy. He's always has been, ever since he was in high school. And he's the kind of person that if anybody that I would have guessed would pull himself out, it would be him. Because he's got that mentality that says that he feels like if I'm not ready, you mentioned a couple seconds ago, it bothers me that he would turn this down. Well, he's young, and this is not going to be his first opportunity, I'm sure.
The other thing to think of, he might be Pat Riley's replacement in Miami.
Right, and he's a very cerebral guy. Like I said, he just kind of the kind of guy that thinks things through, and the fact that he's not going to take this first, which I'm sure he was flattered to have been considered, but he's looking at the big picture thing, and if he thinks he's not ready, frankly, I wish more guys would do that, because there are a lot of people who take these jobs who I don't blame them for taking them, of course, but it turns out that they were indeed not ready, and that's the way a cookie crumbles sometimes.
Reach their level of incompetence, so to speak.
Right. Now, you mentioned Prince, and the funny thing about that, first of all, I agree with you about that he didn't strike me either.
Yeah, the only thing he did as a Piston leadership-wise was a mutiny. When you remember?
Well, he was a quiet guy. He was always, you look at that going to work fivesome, if you will.
Right.
He was the one that he never made the All-Star team. He was never pictured with all the other guys with photographs with Larry Brown after they won the championship. He was kind of not an outcast, of course, but he just was like that.
Never came up as a leader.
Right, and so, which doesn't mean that you can't be a good GM, of course, but you're right. I never got that impression from him that he was being groomed, or if that was even frankly anything he wanted to do. Yeah. Now he is, but the tie, like you said, though, or the fact that maybe he's even being mentioned, even if it's just gratuitously, is because of his ties with Memphis, where of course they poached Stafanski from. So, but I don't consider Tayshaun. Now they say that he may. Now you mentioned Barry. All these names that we're talking about. There's going to be a GM, but they're also the word is in the NBA street, if you will, is the Pistons are going to be hiring a GM, but then this GM, or maybe with Stefanski's help, is going to be cobbling together around this GM, especially if you're talking about a newer, younger guy. They're going to be cobbling around him a bunch of lieutenants. And there could be a guy like a Prince could be in that scenario. Right. Brent Barry could be in that scenario where they're not the GM per se.
All these guys could be hired, but in other positions.
Right. They could fill other roles whether it's the director of player personnel or however many, whatever jobs you want to come up with. So these other names, these kind of ancillary names like Prince and Barry and so forth, might still be in the mix, just not for the GM job.
Right. It's but even as a younger, some of these young up and coming guys, I would still really have second thoughts about joining an organization where I can't exactly pick my own guys, and that kind of leads us to the coaching search, which is ongoing as well. And according to the beat writers earlier in the week, this past week, Dwane Casey, who was fired by the Raptors, who was the current, just recently voted NBA Coach of the Year, but was still let go by the Raptors, was interviewed and reportedly, according to, I believe, guys like Vince Ellis of The Freak, said blew the Pistons away. He was so prepared. But there's been other guys out there who have been interviewed. Jason Kidd, I believe, was in town this weekend, who was fired by the Bucks, I believe, in January of this year, but has a history as a head coach. Of course, a very long history as a top-level player. A weird one out of the blue, Kenny the Jet Smith, TNT analyst, who is known more for writing herd over Shaquille O'Neal and Charles Barkley than his basketball X's and O's, but reportedly he's been wanting to get into the coaching ranks. What gets me about a guy like that, then if you want to coach, become an assistant, such as Juwan Howard, who's been an assistant with the Heat for several years. He is reportedly been either on the list to be interviewed or has already been interviewed, obviously. Howard was a longtime NBA player and, of course, a member of the Michigan's Fab Five, another, obviously, Detroit connection. And The weirdest one, I think, that caught everybody in this town out of the blue, Greg, and I know you wrote about it this week. Michigan head coach John Beilein. That's a, I don't know if I want to call it a head scratcher, but I guess I could say it's a head scratcher because Beilein is absolutely beloved at Michigan. He's resurrected that program from the rubble that was left over from the Ed Martin scandal and essentially some very bad coaching hires after that fact, and has reached 2 NCAA title games in the last 6 years, has a top recruiting class coming in, is probably, I believe, one of the top 10 paid coaches in the NCAA, but is still possibly entertaining an offer from the Pistons. In fact, he has officially interviewed with them, which is actually blowing the Michigan fan base away. So with all these guys, why don't we start with Beilein, because I think that's the most interesting one. Why would John Beilein entertain leaving what looks to be one of the sweetest coaching gigs in basketball?
Well, right. Well, that's what I wrote about. You indicated this weekend on Out of Bounds, which is exactly that. I mean, I can see the Pistons' interest in Beilein.
Yes. His five-out offense is what the NBA's become.
But, although that's, even though the history of college coaches going to the NBA and having any sort of success is not a good one, teams still get enamored. Mm-hmm. They still look down that path. And the Tom Izzo's of the world, Calipari, who was another one who failed, by the way, in the NBA. It just, for whatever reason, there just seems to be this fascination with they may not necessarily get the job, but talking to a college guy.
And maybe finding the next Brad Stewart.
I mean, there's so many reasons why I can see the Pistons, from a PR standpoint, from, like you mentioned, just a pure basketball standpoint. Supposedly, the Beilein's reputation for developing players and teaching players and so forth. But what I don't get, and which is what the crux of my piece was why Beilein would want to mess with the Pistons in any way, shape, or form. I mean, he's 65 years old. By the time he would get rolling with this job and really get into it, he'd be approaching 70. The grueling travel in the NBA is just ridiculous. I mean,
college where they play maybe twice a week.
Well, you've got. I mentioned it in the piece I wrote. You really, when you think about it, between the exhibition season, the regular season, and if you make the playoffs, you're talking well over 100 games. And you could coach in college for 3 seasons and not coach 100 games. Right. You're talking back-to-back games. You're talking 3 games in 4 nights, 5 games in 7 nights. You don't have a lot of practice time in the NBA. You don't have a lot of time. Practice time is precious in the NBA. It really is. I mean, you've got between the games, and then you've got the travel in and out of airports. It's really, once this regular season begins, practice. I mean, the teaching does not. There's not a lot of time for that kind of stuff during the regular season. So I said that would drive him nuts as well. Yeah. The idea that the people that are the idea that's being put forth is that Beilein is trying to leverage this Pistons thing to get more money out of Michigan. Well, first of all, I don't think he needs to do that, because I think, like you said, he's adored there. Ward Manuel, their Michigan's athletic director, came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago and said he wants Jimmy Harbaugh and John Beilein to finish their coaching careers at Michigan, and that was before the Pistons talk. So and Beilein signed through 2021. By the way, it's not like he's up for renewal next year. It's still 3 years away. Yeah. So I don't know this notion of he's using the Pistons. And by the way, Al, you can only successfully leverage another offer if A, you're the front runner for that job, which he's not. Right. And B, if the people that you're trying to leverage actually think that you in your heart would leave. And I don't think Ward Manuel is shaking in his boots that the Pistons are going to hire John Beilein. And so this whole notion of Beilein is leveraging the Pistons to get more money out of Michigan, I think is ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, people would ask me, and I answered the question on the column, well, why did he take the interview to begin with? Well, it's a good question. I would say that he took the interview because the Pistons reached out to him. He decided that he would intriguing. He'd listen to what they had to say. He'd do the interview, and then maybe he possibly just did it out of courtesy. I don't think he has any intention. Now, of course, you could say, well, if you really thought that, why didn't he just turn the interview down to begin with? Well, but sometimes it's you are intrigued by what teams are going to say. You don't know what they might throw at you, but I don't think he has any interest in going to the NBA at this age, and especially for a team that has had no success in the last 10 years whatsoever, and
with a roster that doesn't really fit his offense. When you think about it,
right, and into a situation, Al, where he doesn't know who the GM's going to be.
Right.
I mean, if he was interviewing, that's the other thing we got. That's the other thing we need to talk about, by the way, in this segment is these coaching candidates. We were talking earlier about the GMs coming in where a coach may already be picked or on its way to being picked. Well, what about these coaching candidates who are coming in who have no idea who the GM's going to be? That's another kind of a wrinkle as well. I mean, I don't know why. It's one thing if there was an entrenched GM who was there, who was interviewing coaching candidates, then at least the coaching candidates would know who this person is that they'll be reporting to and what kind of working relationship they might have. Right now, they're being really, frankly, interviewed blind as far as, they don't know who they're going to work for.
As far as we know, anyway.
Well, as far as we know.
Right.
They don't, right. And be that as it may, John Beilein is by no stretch of imagination going to the Pistons. No way, shape, or form. It's probably going to be somebody now. Dwane Casey is high on their list because of his NBA acumen, success in Toronto. He's not a spring chicken either, but they feel like he's the best. I think the feeling is that the Pistons think that Casey's the best guy that gives them is the guy that gives them the best chance of taking this existing group of players and squeezing the most out of them to contend for not only a playoff spot but maybe a home court in the first round. I mean, that's what I think what the feeling is. But there's no way John Beilein's going to the Pistons. No way.
Well, just a couple things to throw out there about Beilein on why he might. One, obviously the NBA is the pinnacle of coaching, and his career has been one step up to the next. I mean, he literally started as a college head coach, junior college, small college, ultimately West Virginia, then Michigan. Obviously, the next step would be, if that's what he wanted to do, would be the NBA. Maybe a lot of these guys are probably fascinated about thinking, these guys got egos, and he's probably thinking, could I work in the NBA and, would my philosophies carry over as well as they do in college? That's just how these guys think. I mean, they are, type A achievers, and sometimes maybe they think, well, as you said, at the very least, it's worth investigating. If they ask, why not? But the other thing to remember is that he could take this job and not uproot his family. He's already based in Ann Arbor.
That's what? That's something I did not touch on. The one thing I did say that would be an advantage if he wanted to take this job was that he wouldn't have to do any more recruiting.
Yep.
And I know that
because he never was known as a big recruiter.
Well,
he's gotten good players, but he's always seemed to swing and miss at the 5-star guys.
Well, I mean, I just don't know that that's something that after a while you get. I remember Ray Scott told me many years ago that when he took the job at Eastern Michigan, Ray did it backwards. He was in the NBA, then he went to college. And he said that he said, Greg, when I took the job at Eastern, I just wasn't. I was not prepared for the recruiting aspect of it. Right. He says I wasn't good at it. Mm-hmm. I didn't put a lot of time into it. And that was ultimately what sunk his tenure at Eastern was recruiting. And so not having to recruit would be a plus if you're him. You mentioned at the top of that point, you said, well, the NBA is the pinnacle of coaching. It is, except if you're a guy if you're the big man on campus like Beilein is. Mm-hmm. Now it may be the pinnacle of coaching if you're one of these guys that kind of is like a chess or checker piece that goes and you're at any one given place no more than 2 or 3 years.
Or someone like Stevens who went from Butler.
Yeah, right. But when you're the big man on campus at a school like Michigan, where you've gone to 2 finals in the last 7 or 6 or however many years it's been, and you have been told when your AD goes public and says, "I want you to be here the rest of your career," you talk about egos. That's an ego stroke. I mean, that's an ego stroke right there. So I don't know if the NBA is the pinnacle. I use that in quotation marks for a guy like Beilein, because it's the classic case of being the big man on campus, going into and now you're going to be a little fish in a big pond. Yeah. And I don't know that. I mean, there is. I know you're saying about the ego part of it, and these guys are type A's and they're competitive. And what if could I be the guy that possibly, bucks the trend here and actually takes the Pistons to the promised land? And like you said, I don't have to uproot my family, that's a good point. But again, Al, I just look at that schedule. I look at the travel. I look at the lack of practice. These college coaches, that's what they're addicted to. They're not addicted to the in-game coaching as much as you think they are. They're addicted to the teaching aspect. They're addicted to taking young players right out of high school and molding them into fine young men and fine young basketball players who may or may not go on to pro careers. That's what they're addicted to. Bobby Knight said, I saw him in an interview years ago, he said, I don't even consider myself a coach. I consider myself a teacher. I'm a teacher first. And frankly, Al, a lot of these college coaches, this, started off as high school teachers. I'm not even a teacher of sports, a history teacher, social studies teacher. And then they moved to who happened to also coach a basketball team. So these guys, they love the teaching aspect of it. That's what they get off on. And I don't think if you're a teacher at heart and you're going to be going to the NBA playing 82 games where you get a practice, you're lucky to get a couple of practices.
Lucky to get a walkthrough in a ballroom before the game. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that is attractive to a guy like Beilein, but we'll see.
Well, let me throw this out here. Here's another one. Maybe Beilein is tired of playing second fiddle to the football program, despite being far more successful than Jim Harbaugh or the football program has been in a couple decades. You got to remember, why did Steve Orr leave Michigan? Basketball team with
Johnny Orr.
Johnny Orr, right. Steve, I'm getting Steve, because then it leads Bill Frieder.
Right.
Johnny Orr left because the program was considered second class. Bill Frieder left. Same reason. He wanted to go someplace where he might be the big man on campus, not second fiddle behind the football team. And now here we are with Beilein. Maybe Beilein's feeling the same way, because there was reports out there, I believe Vernon Quinn of The Athletic put it out there, that his assistants are woefully underpaid compared to some of the other assistants at some of the Big Ten schools, such as Michigan State, Ohio State, things like that. Could there be a little of that going there? Because Michigan has a history of that. No matter how good that basketball program gets, Michigan is still and always probably will be a football school. And you can go, even go with how long it took the university to upgrade the basketball facilities there. Because for years it was second-class facilities compared to what the football team got. Maybe there's something there with Beilein's thinking, look at me. I'm running a top 10 program here, yet I'm lucky to get table scraps compared to Jim Harbaugh, who's also getting paid about $6 million more a year.
Yeah, but didn't he know that when he took the job?
Well, got to remember, back then, there was no Harbaugh back then. God, when he took the job, was still Rich Rod still there?
I think he took the job the last year of Lloyd.
Lloyd, okay.
Carr.
No, I don't. Well, regardless, it's been 11 years, I believe. So
yeah. It was close, but
of that, even still, you would, maybe he's just thinking he's just not getting the support he believes that program deserves.
Well, clearly he took the interview. I'm playing it off as he took the interview as a courtesy. He was intrigued, but he did take the interview. So we have to. That's fair and square. He took the interview for whatever reason we don't know. We assume that he didn't have, he didn't have to fly in,
right? Unless another theory,
unless it was out in Los Angeles,
just to get his name out there, because he can now tell recruits, the NBA likes me, the NBA is interested in me.
Here's what was interesting:
I make NBA players. That's a selling point.
Well, here's what's interesting about this, and I wrote this about this as well. Is it's funny. This is funny to me because Tom Izzo is generally the one that always gets all of the NBA talk. Okay, this is the first time that I remember
any Michigan coach,
right, getting any sort of NBA talk at whatsoever. And it's always been Izzo in this state. And but even when Tom hasn't even got an interview, he's always been, his name comes up all the time. Sometimes he interviews and sometimes he doesn't. And there were rumors that he was approached by the Pistons in 2014 before they hired Stan. Right. So now here comes Beilein, who gets an interview with the Pistons. I find that kind of funny, frankly. But the funny thing about the other funny thing about this whole Beilein talk is that he's a kind of a guy, Al, who doesn't seem to really. To me, he doesn't fit the NBA coaching. I know what you're saying about the offense. I agree with you. From a basketball
sense. Are you talking about his demeanor?
Yes, he doesn't strike me as an NBA type guy for whatever reason.
He strikes me more an NBA guy than Tom Izzo would. Could you see how long Izzo would last if it's his chronics on the sideline?
I agree with you there. I agree with you there. Yes, that's true. Yeah. But I just I guess maybe if this was 10 years ago and he was 55 years old, but at age 65.
Pictured some team could have really made hay with Beilein if they had plucked him from West Virginia. And he would have been the forefather of the new offenses in the NBA.
Well, yeah. Well, you can't – this whole thing about, he doesn't have to uproot his family. Well, that's true, but they're not going to see him.
Yeah, not going to see him for –
They're going to see him anyway because he's going to be gone for so we'll see.
Well, but you really think in the end, though, it's going to be Dwane Casey, Jason Kidd, any of these guys, or think there might be a dark horse yet?
Well, I think if Dwane Casey were to call them up right now and say I'll take the job, they would give it to him.
Do it, yeah.
I think Casey is probably. I think the Pistons would like Casey more than he would like the Pistons right now. I think he's kind of. I would say he's the leader in the clubhouse right now. If he were to come out and say. I think they're waiting for him to decide whether Casey's got one more year left. He was fired.
Yeah, he can sit on his ass for $6 million.
He can take his time. He can maybe wait for another job to open.
A better job
that he feels is a better job, a job closer to a championship. However, you mentioned the Type A personalities. Casey did take a Toronto team that wasn't very good, and frankly, he took a Toronto team that's in worse shape than the Pistons are right now, and really did a pretty good job. Now, he may be intrigued enough with the notion of coaching Drummond and Reggie and Blake together, but I think the Pistons. I think Casey's on the top of their list. I'm not sure Pistons are on the top of Casey's list.
Yeah, the one that just the Kenny Smith thing. I think that feels like a stunt, but. Jason Kidd feels like a retread. At least Casey's got the track record, better track record than any other of these guys. And you said he did a lot with that Raptors team. He's got issues, though. He's more of a defensive guy than an offensive guy. We know the trouble the Pistons' offenses is that, but you can fix those things with assistant coaches and things like that. I guess one guy I'm surprised that was thrown out there almost immediately as a candidate, but we haven't heard anything about him being interviewed is Jerry Stackhouse, who I believe won the G League with the Raptors team, the Raptors minor league team. He won the G League. Is supposedly really an up-and-coming head coach. Has done really well at the lower levels. He's done what you'd expect of someone who wants to be a head coach, and that he started at the low level and is now working his way up. I'm just surprised he hasn't gotten a sniff from the Pistons, supposedly. He seems like I would not have an issue with a guy like Stackhouse, who is shown to have coaching chops, but is still also young enough to relate to the players.
If they go with a guy like Casey, who I think is 61, if I'm not mistaken, right. They could certainly bring Stackhouse as an assistant, and they could groom him because Casey's not going to coach forever. They could groom him to be, there's a lot to like about Stackhouse. Obviously former Piston, but beyond that, he seems to be again one of these younger up and coming guys that people seem to like.
He's doing it the right way, if you ask me. Not like Kenny Smith, who's trying to jump from television to a head coaching position.
Well, we don't know if that's Kenny Smith trying to do that, if the Pistons are reaching out to him, and who knows.
There's been talks, though. This is not his first rodeo with head coaching jobs. I believe the Nets or someone talked to him as well. But
okay.
In the end, kind of wrap this up because we've got a lot of Tiger stuff to talk about. it still seems like a backwards way to hire your front office and coaching staff.
Yeah.
That's the thing I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around. You know, I was a boss in another lifetime, and I wanted to hire my own damn people. I mean,
right.
You're hiring me to run something, I will run it my way, and that means I will have my people doing positions at the positions I feel they're best served. To do this, I might hire a coach first, or I might, you got Stafanski in the mix, who we really still don't even know what his defined role is going to be. I would give this, unless I had absolute assurances from Tom Gores, I would really wade very, very carefully into this hiring process of this team, because it seemed screwed up.
Yeah, it does. But again, if the Pistons are homing in on a guy like Langdon, for example, who seems to be the front runner, he's 42 years old. This is his first GM job. He's not going to have. He doesn't have the, like I say, the cachet to say, whoa, I want to pick my own coach. So that's not even an issue. So I guess if you look at it from that standpoint, it is what it is. And if you're just trying to get the best guys. Look, I'm just trying to get the best coach. Yeah. I'm just trying to get the best GM, and then we'll try to make it work later. Well, then I guess there's a method to the madness.
Basketball operations be done with it, and then set it up some other way. Because right now, then they should make it clear what Stefanski's doing there. I think that's the one thing that's bothering me right now. What is Stefanski ultimately going to do there, and could he ultimately run a power play? Say, I'm just going to run basketball operations myself.
Well, what I'm, as we were talking, I was doing some internet research, and the way that the NBA insiders are thinking it's going to go is that Stefanski will have the title of president of basketball operations, and there'll be a GM who will report to Stefanski. So that's kind of the way that the NBA thinks it's going to.
Traditional than what the Pistons were over the past 4 years. Okay.
Right.
All right, with that, enough. Boy, that got us fired up. This is for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
Okay,
especially this time of year.
Yeah. Okay. Question 2. Fire away.
Yeah. This person again, basketball, 1943, won a title as a player in 1967, and then won a title as a coach in 1983 for the same team that he won as a player. So he won championship.
I know it already. Is it Billy Cunningham?
Billy Cunningham. Yep, absolutely. Yep, Billy Cunningham, born this day in 1943 in Brooklyn, and horrific knee injury ended his career in '75. But he ended up becoming I was looking at his coaching record. I didn't know it was this good. His lifetime coaching record was 700. Yeah, I didn't know he was. I knew he was successful. I didn't know he was that successful. And he won the championship in '83. Always
better have that kind of a record when you got George Gervin and Dr. J and all those guys on your roster. So,
well, he didn't have
Doug
Gervin.
Collins
No, he didn't have Gervin. He didn't have Gervin. Gervin played for the Spurs.
Not Gervin. I've got what's the other? Not George.
Well, he had
George Gervin.
Irving, obviously. McGinnis, yes.
George McGinnis.
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking of.
And Moses Malone too, right or no?
Yeah. And Moses Malone at center. Yeah. Exactly. But hey, I finally got one first time in a while. I'm feeling better about myself.
So you get a free savings account at First Federal.
Oh boy, I'm going to take that 0.0001% interest. All right. Let's move on from the carnage that is the Pistons to the, well, I guess right now we have a team in the Detroit Tigers that the fan base is kind of rallying around right now, much in thanks to a goose that crashed into the scoreboard at Comerica Park 5 games ago now, and actually the Tigers have gone 4-1 since the rally goose struck, and thank goodness the goose lived. I guess he was ultimately checked for health, and was released up at MSU. So yay goose! But take the rally goose out of it, and I think the best line I heard about the rally goose is when Ron Gardenhire was asked about. Gardenhire said they're baseball players; they got all kinds of time on their hands. So, which is true.
Yeah.
Which is not why they have a goose decoy in their dugout. But regardless of all that, the Tigers are kind of on a roll right now, Greg. They did lose today. They lost, but they still won this. They've won their last few series. They lost today, but won the series against the Blue Jays. They're 4-1 since the goose incident. They're 8-3 in their last 11, and they are doing this, playing fairly well, despite the I-75 shuttle from between Toledo and Detroit working overtime because of a monstrous outbreak of injuries. Michael Fulmer has been average at best, mired in a slump. He pitched really well for like 5 innings today, then fell off in the 6th. Ended up, I believe, taking a loss. Not much it helped in the bullpen. They're essentially running a 3-man platoon at second base because they ultimately decided, they brought up Ronnie Rodriguez, Nico Goodrum's been playing everywhere, and then also the incumbent Dixon Machado has, his OPS is .575, so enough said. So now they don't even have a regular second baseman at this point. Guys like literally cast-offs like Goodrum, John Hicks, who played pretty darn well while Miguel Cabrera was on the DL for a month. And I said Rodriguez has played well. Guys like Jacoby Jones is playing excellent defense, even though his offense is a little bit to be desired. Martin, who I ragged on his signing, has been a plus player for the Tigers, and he's literally a cast-off type player as well. Then you got someone like Nick Castellanos is carrying this team offensively with he's hitting 340. He's hitting around 340 right now, for Christ's sake. Jamer Candelario is making Al Avila look like a genius with that trade. He's slashing 274, 363, 531, and he leads the team with 9 home runs. I know he had another RBI or 2 today. So he's looking like he's going to be a long-term starter at third base. So things are okay. They're still under 500. But I believe right now they are, I got to look that up. Yeah, I believe they are 28-31, 3 games under. They're still not far behind Cleveland. And what's funny is that this is an under-talented team, yet the fan base seems to be rallying around them because, as we know in Detroit, they love scrappy, they love blue-collar, they like grit. And this team, thanks to Gardenhire and some role players and cast-offs who are having career years, are at the very least have kept this town entertained. Especially when you compare it to a much higher paid and more talented team the last 2 years, which the fan base was, I think, they turned on, because they felt this team should be doing much better. They underachieve while this team is overachieving, and we know how fans like overachievers. So they're on a roll, Greg, but I doubt it's sustainable.
Well, who knows about sustainable? I mean, I look at the Tampa Bay Rays. Somehow they're hanging around 500 too. That was another team that everybody thought was going to stink to high heaven. I think one of the things that this embracing of this team is one of the reasons for it is the fans. They look at the standings, they see. And we talked about this a month ago. It's still the same thing. Orioles 17-41,
right?
White Sox 18-38, Royals 21-38. The Twins, who were supposed to be much better, they swept. I think they swept the Indians, but they're still 5 games under 500. In the National League, you get a bunch of crummy teams. Marlins are crummy, Reds are terrible, and I think that the fans are frankly kind of relieved that the Tigers are not one of those teams that are just buried, and they're still, and the Indians aren't pulling away. The Tigers are still only 2.5 games behind first place.
But just to calm fans down, they're 8.5 out of the wild card, and there's 4 or 5 teams ahead of them. So
right.
if you put the record in overall perspective, they're, again, like we said on our last full podcast, they're the best of the worst. Because when you look at it, there's 6 teams, 8, maybe 6 teams that are legitimately trying for a playoff spot, maybe 8. And then the rest of the American League is just we're just like the Tigers. We're going to actively rebuild. And some of them are just more they're more rebuilding than others. The Tigers have been playing surprisingly well, but when you put their record in context, it puts things a little differently. That's the thing. But yeah, you're right. Weirder things have happened where bad teams have made deep runs into September. If
you had told the fans and made just a blanket statement to all the Tigers fans all over the world and said during spring training and said on June 3rd the Tigers will be 2.5 games out of first place.
Yeah.
They would have They would
have said liar.
Right. So here's the other thing, too. You've got a guy, first of all, we mentioned this before, the fans have never, it's been so long since the fans in Detroit have been able to root for a scrappy baseball team.
Yeah, and back to 2006, really.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would call that team scrappy. They were 78-38 for God's sakes at one point. Yeah. I think that they look at first of all, they love Gardenhire. I mean, if he was a politician, his approval rating would probably be in the 60s or 70s right now. He comes from, as you know, as all the fans know, he comes from Minnesota, which was known for being a pain in the ass. Those teams were definitely a thorn on the Tigers' side for sure. And they were always known as that scrappy, kind of overachieving team. Now, they could never beat the Yankees in the playoffs. I get that. But Gardenhire brings with him that Minnesota aura, if you will, that's all he did was manage scrappy teams. And so the fans, I think, this is almost as much of a Gardenhire thing. You read about him, he's all over every story you read about the Tigers, he's quoted and he's talked about and he's mentioned and he's, if not credited for this, he's certainly a big reason for it. And he's having fun with it. And he's the thing with you would never have something like the Rally Goose with any of these teams under Jim Leyland or Brad Ausmus, partly because those teams were always, for the most part, expected to achieve lofty things. Right. And teams that embrace things like the Rally Goose are usually not good teams. They're teams that are looking for something to kind of, now I know Nate Robertson back in 06 had that gum thing, the Rally Gum or whatever, he chew all that gum or whatever. But for the most part, the teams that are expected to do well don't need things like the Rally Goose. Okay, so that would never have happened under Brad. It would never have happened under Jim Leyland, but it's happening under Gardenhire, who is encouraging it. He's not trying to be a wet blanket. He's not trying to poo-poo it, or he's not looking at it as, oh, I wish they wouldn't do this. He's having fun with it, and the fans are. I think they're kind of relieved that the team isn't 25 games out of first place, and I think they're relieved that they are buying into the Gardenhire factor. And this is the man that they wanted 2 or 3 years ago, and here he is. And I mean, you mentioned Candelario and some of these other younger players that are exciting to watch, Jacoby Jones and so forth, and Castellanos obviously taking this step forward in his career. It's refreshing. And how you asked about sustainability, I don't know. I have no idea. But when they lost, I'll tell you this: when they lost 5 in a row a couple weeks ago, I went on Facebook. I said, "Oh, is this the beginning of that dreaded 3-13 streak that we were all kind of waiting for? That was going to officially kick the Tigers to the curb?" Well, guess what? After they lost 5 in a row, they won 8-2. So you gotta give them credit for that. I mean, I hate to give managers too much credit, and I hate to give them too much blame, but I have to think that Ron Gardenhire's demeanor, his loosey-goosey attitude, the way he's kind of having fun with everybody, the players keep talking about it over and over and over again. And you got guys like Shane Green and Castellanos who are trying to become leaders, they say in the clubhouse. I think that's all reflective of the manager. And to lose 5 in a row. Go 8 games under. They lost a couple of tough ones in Seattle to start that losing streak, but to bounce back against some pretty good teams. I mean, they beat the Angels 3 out of 4, and they're doing really well at home. I think they've won 5 straight series at home now. Not bad.
Yeah, but one thing to keep in mind: they have a pretty heavy schedule coming up over the next week.
Yeah, they do.
Better with the Yankees tomorrow.
Right. Right.
They go to Boston for 3 games,
right,
and then they play the Tribe for 3 games. I mean, these are all teams that are expected to make the playoffs. We'll see if the Rally Goose is still working after a week. Especially if they're playing those AL East teams, which are they're pretty much the elite of the American League right now.
Right.
But when it comes to this sustainability, I look at the rest of the schedule for this month: Twins, White Sox, Reds, Blue Jays, Athletics, all teams hovering around 500
or way below.
Below 500.
Yeah.
The Athletics are above 500, but only by a game or two. Then the rest of them are awful.
Right.
They're playing worse than the Tigers. So,
right. Oh yeah.
I guess that in some ways the Tigers' plans got derailed. That playing, they're going to be really bad this year, and we'll have another high draft pick. They just happened to decide to rebuild in the year where pretty much 3/4 of the league seems to be doing that. And if anything, that could put a crimp in the Tigers' plans for the trade deadline, because how many teams out there are actually going to be in contention to the point where they're going to want to make trades? In the American League, that's like 5 teams right now that really look like they're capable of making a run, at the playoffs. So it's at the very least, Greg, the way they're playing right now, like I said, they're for the most part they're playing pretty strong fundamentally. They're doing all the right things when it comes to taking the right base, going to the opposite field. They're not playing a lot of small ball, which I'm happy about, but they seem to be making, for the most part, the right decisions, even if those right decisions don't always work out. And after what we've seen over the past few years, especially under Brad Ausmus, I think the fan base really appreciates that. Yeah,
and that was one of the knocks on Brad was exactly what you just said: base running, fundamentals. Again, take a lot of that with a grain of salt. Was it fair? Was some of that criticism fair? Of course not. But that was the knock. The knock was there was that knock, and the other knock against Brad was that he wasn't as engaged with his players. And I read a quote. I can't remember who said it. It wasn't designed to be a slam at Brad, but the player who I'm thinking of said it was more of a pro Gardenhire thing than it was an anti-Austin. He said, Ron is in here, Gardy's in here, always talking to us. He's always making the rounds. He's always talking to us. Now, to be fair, when Brad was here, he had a lot of veterans, lot of veteran guys, and he maybe didn't feel like that was necessary.
Probably felt like he was walking into a minefield at times.
Well, yeah, and he was a young manager, too, at the time. Very young, obviously. So now you've got an experienced, seasoned guy like Gardenhire who comes in, and apparently, according to this player, and not just him, other players have said the same thing, he talks a lot to the players. And the other thing he does, they say, is especially after tough losses, he'll loosen the team up. He'll come in and he'll say something funny, or he'll say something. I
remember hearing that. He'll say, they'll play music.
Yeah, right. Yeah, what are you doing? This isn't a funeral. I mean, it's
baseball.
Yeah, and I think that in professional sports where everything is do or die, the fans here in Detroit, they want the manager to kick the buffet table over, and
after every loss, they want the manager to toss food tables and stuff.
Right. You hire Kirk Gibson,
Yeah.
And so but that's not the recipe. But so I think that there is something to be said for, and again, managers get too much credit when the team wins. They get way too much blame when the team loses. But what I do believe that is a fair representation is that there are managers who know how to run a clubhouse, and some managers who struggle with that a little bit. Yeah. Tito Francona in Cleveland runs. They say even in Boston and in Cleveland ran a great clubhouse. Sparky, that was one of his, and Leland. Those were to hit their check marks was that they had a good clubhouse. Brad, you never heard that.
Yeah, we didn't hear a lot of the stuff that went down.
Right. I remember last year you and I did a show late in the season.
Right.
When a lot of that stuff, I can't remember who came out with that article. Came out with all that at the end of the year. It came out with all that, all those skeletons.
Of the press, but about the Victor Martinez stuff.
Yeah.
And it sounded like Ausmus just could not handle the veteran players, and they seemed to kind of
run roughshod them.
They set all the rules.
Yeah. That's what happened to Alan Travel when he was here.
Yeah, that's another good point. Yeah, exactly. Some guys are cut out for it, some aren't.
Right.
And obviously Gardenhire is cut out to be a manager. And I wasn't thrilled by his hire, but I am enjoying watching him manage, and I do like the fact that he has shown signs of paying attention to analytics, like batting Candelario as leadoff man, for example. Makes perfect sense.
And Nick number 2.
It's second. That's analytics 101.
Right.
You put your best hitters at the top of the order so
right.
they get the most at bats.
Right.
In analytics land, your best hitter on the team, he's your number 2 hitter. That's where you should put him. Now, that's the kind of stuff. And he even said, my analytics guys gave me stuff, made perfect sense. That's what I'm doing. So at least he's listening to him. Obviously, he doesn't do it all the time, which leads us to Victor Martinez. This is really my big sore point with Gardenhire and the Tigers in general. Why is Victor Martinez still batting in the middle of the order? For that matter, why is Victor Martinez still on this team?
Right.
He's hitting for absolutely no power. He's slugging 366. He's slashing 251, 313, 366. That's essentially, he's hitting like...
a number 8 hitter.
Yeah, bingo, yeah. He's hitting like a Dixon Machado or someone like that. He can't, and he can't run. Literally cannot run. He can't beat the shift, and they put the heavy shift on him at this point. You're seeing way too many of these ground balls where he's thrown out in the short right field. Yet, if you look at the numbers, Greg, in every game he started as DH, he's hit in the 3, 4, or 5 slot every single game. And even worse, if you look what Kristen Stewart is doing in Toledo, he's actually crushing it right now. He leads the team with 13 home runs, 35 RBIs. He's slugging 560. He's one of the best hitting outfielders in the minor leagues, in the AAA right now. And he has yet to get a call-up, essentially because of, one, there's a bit of a roster crunch because of all the injuries, and they're shifting pitchers on and off the 40-man roster. I mean, that's been the big thing, is trying to who's on the 40-man, who's off the 40-man. Yet, Stewart is doing everything that's asked of him. He's not a great defender, but they could really, really use his bat at the big league level, yet he's not getting the call-up. Much of it is because of two things. They have a Rule 5 guy in the roster in Victor Reyes, who I think it's pretty obvious at this point. They're committed to keeping him on the roster for the entire year, which means essentially they have a pinch runner as the 25th man. So essentially they're playing with a 24-man roster.
Right.
And then you got Martinez, who can only DH, is not a good DH anymore, and that is taking up a really valuable roster spot at this point, which should be going to the young guys at this point. And Stewart has done everything the Tigers have asked of him, and he is, he's earned the call up, yet he's not getting the call up because there's no room on the roster for him right now. It makes absolutely no sense that this team, one, is still putting Martinez in the middle of the order, and two, even on the team at this point. You write him a check for $16 million, say thank you for your service, and you both teams part ways. That's where it's heading at this point. If that move isn't made by the All-Star break, I'm going to be wondering what the hell they're thinking. I really am.
Yeah, that's totally fair. As you were saying that, I was thinking, well, it might still happen that he does indeed, that they do indeed write that check, and but it could also be that they're saying, well, he's got one more year left. Out of deference to him, he's been a good Tiger. He's been a good big leaguer.
But how many guys get that?
Yeah, no, I know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
It's not like he's Al Kaline. He's been on the team for 6-7 years.
No, that's true. And you mentioned Stewart. And if indeed you're going to go all in on, and that's the other thing too, Al. They've traded J.D. Martinez, they've traded Justin Upton, they traded Justin Verlander.
And they're playing Jacoby Jones as the left fielder, and he can't hit his way off a wet paper bag.
Well,
his fans love him. His on-base percentage is .272 right
now. Yeah, no, he's exciting, and when he does get on base, he makes things happen. He's a great outfielder.
But he doesn't get on base. That's the thing.
Well, I mean, but he's part of the future.
As a fourth or fifth outfielder,
he's part of the future. I don't think fourth or fifth. I think
if he doesn't, he's a plus defender, but
you have to be
an outfielder.
But you have to be a Comerica Park
base percentage. What's that?
Well, you have to be a plus outfielder in Comerica Park.
But even still, you got to hit somewhat.
He will. He will. I think he's already made. I think he's already made improvements since he's in the very. Don't forget, he hasn't been a big leaguer for very long. Yeah. He hasn't not been. But back to Martinez. So they've traded all these guys, and if you're truly in on the, Al Avila keeps saying, this is the path we're going to go. I don't want to hear anything about what if you're hanging around at the All-Star break. We're not going to be buyers.
Any fan that thinks they're buyers is delusion. Yeah.
Right. But what I'm saying is, this is the path that he keeps saying, Avila keeps saying, the Tigers are on, which is great.
Yeah.
You mentioned Candelario and some of these other guys that they've acquired, but it's funny how that does not apply to Victor.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I know he's not tradable. I'm not suggesting they trade him because you can't trade the guy. He's literally untradeable. But if this is the path that they've chosen to take, and they're all in on this rebuild, then why is he still on the team?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
That's a fair question.
Yeah. I mean, if he was
nobody's asking that question. Nobody's asking that question, Al, by the way. I don't see anybody in the media that's asking that question.
Right. Yeah. Other than the fans.
Yeah.
I would hope it. At least some of the fans. Some fans have that same thing. Well, he's a respected veteran, and like I said, they're treating him like he's Alan Trammell or Al Kaline or something like that. One, he hasn't been a Tiger that damn long.
Right.
Two, they were completely forgetting about all the clubhouse cancer crap from last year.
Right.
Martinez is what he is. He's collecting a paycheck at this point.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't blame. I don't blame him either. If someone was going to pay me $18 million to have a 600 OPS, I do the same goddamn thing. But it's got to come to a head really, really soon. Especially when you see how Gardenhire is struggling with this roster, to keep because they're the disabled list, especially with pitchers, is ridiculous. Stump's on the disabled list. Zimmerman's on the DL. Norris is on the DL. Liriano's on the DL. Alex Wilson's on the DL. Yeah. They're having so much trouble trying to cobble together what's the switch guys between the disabled list, the 40-man, and the 25-man. Then all of a sudden you got two guys you can't do a damn thing with. So at this point, Reyes, you might as well at this point. You're already into June. Keep him on the roster, whatever. You got a 24-man roster. Then you factor in Martinez. All of a sudden you work with a 23-man roster, and then you start handcuffing your manager. And that's when you go to Chris Ilitch and say, write a check. You want to start improving this team. The easiest way to improve that is get rid of Victor Martinez, bring up Stewart, see what he's got. If he doesn't have it, start bringing up guys like Gerber, whatever. Or hell, there's probably guys on the waiver wire that can hit better than Martinez right now.
And he's only signed through this year anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like
one way or the other.
It's not like we're asking you to eat a contract of a guy who's signed for 2 or 3 more years.
Yeah,
his contract expires at the end of the season, so it seems. And we're saying all this, and it could be that indeed that decision is made sometime middle of the season.
Yeah.
And they do indeed bring up a guy like Stewart, for example, right, and see what he's got, and because it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's getting to the point. They say, his average is up. Yeah, he's hitting 250. And it's all singles.
Right.
You don't pay a guy $18 million to hit 250. Hit singles. So
and if I had a dime for every time he grounds out to second base.
Yeah, exactly.
And when I say second base, shallow right field.
Yeah. Yeah, and while we're on this topic, I didn't put it in the notes, but we should bring it up. All the Cabrera stuff that went down while we really didn't have a chance to really talk about it.
Yeah.
With the where he said he wasn't going to come back from injuries early because people got on his case so much trying to play through injuries before. He kind of playing a victim, playing the martyr.
Right.
Somewhat.
Yeah. Right.
And then there was the secondhand story out of Miami that he told a Miami front office guy that he wanted to end his career there, and obviously when he came off the DL, he supposedly cleared all this up and says, "I want to finish my career in Detroit." But this is one of those things where I think you're kind of getting to see who Miguel Cabrera is. I don't, especially with the off-field issues that he's had his entire career, going back to the alcoholism and the wife beating. Now look, he's got a mistress and 2 families, and he's in court for child support and all this crap. Miguel Cabrera, a great ball player, sounds like a pretty miserable human being.
Well, you mentioned Kaline, and gone are the days, Al, where these players were, drank milk. You know what I mean?
He probably didn't drink milk back then. It just wasn't reported.
Yeah, and I'm saying that figuratively, of course. Yeah. I just think that it's a different time. And it's a different, Al Kaline came up in the early 50s, and Miguel Cabrera came up 50 years after that. And, it's a different thing. Back, in those days, players made their home in Michigan year round. Didn't matter. They didn't go down to South America or Central America or wherever they go to live. They would live in Michigan year round, no matter what the winters, how bad the winters were, and so forth. It's just a different time, and different, and frankly, a different culture, different nationality.
Well, I'll just say this. I'd love Miguel Cabrera as an offensive force. Now that he's back healthy, the guy's raking.
Yeah.
This year, he's hitting the ball. He's doing what you need him to do on the field.
Right.
But you're being paid $30 million. Don't play the martyr. That's
right.
The kind of thing that bugs me.
Yeah.
Is that you're being paid that kind of money. Don't play the victim, especially in a town like this.
Oh, and especially in a soft market like Detroit. Yes. When I say a soft media market, he came from Miami, which is the soft.
He's hit him with kid gloves.
Oh, kid gloves in Miami, kid gloves in Detroit.
Yes.
Does he hear things, from yelled from around when he's standing in the batting on death circle?
Some goon in the stands.
Oh, yeah, sure. But, come on now. Overall,
yeah.
And then I saw some people on Twitter who I respect who leaped to his defense and said, "Oh, yeah, you tell Miguel. That's what I don't like about the fan base here is they're so negative." And I don't understand this. I really don't. He should go play in New York.
New York, Philadelphia,
for
Boston,
2 weeks.
LA, yeah,
2 weeks, and see what he says.
Exactly.
So but back to this Miami thing. By the way, first of all, he says that he was kidding.
Yeah.
Secondly, the person who said that he said this apparently does not have a lot of credibility either. This ex-Marlins executive, I guess, has not a lot of credibility. And why would he want to play for Miami?
Yeah.
Unless he has no delusions or illusions of winning another championship again, why would you want to play? They traded away everybody. Yep. I don't put any credence in that.
Yeah, I'm with you there. But it just added fuel to the fire. It
added fuel to the fire. It was a well timed. Whoever threw that out there it was piling on. It was adding fuel to the fire, and but this notion of like you said, playing the martyr.
I'll just say this, if he hadn't played through some of those injuries, 2013, and gotten healthy, maybe the Tigers have a World Series at this point. Because we all remember in 2013 was playing on one damn leg.
Right.
For pretty much 2 months.
Right.
I don't know if it would have helped or not. But we've seen too many players try to play through injuries and end up hurting the team more than they help the team.
Yeah, but you know what, though? You're kind of damned if you're the management. You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't in that scenario, and to a certain extent, the player too. If you don't come back, the fans look at you sideways. If you're the management, if you don't let a guy come back, then you're damned. If you let him come back too early and he gets in, and it's really a tough spot to go to a guy like that who's got that kind of, he's a Hall of Famer. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
To go up to him and say, no, I know we appreciate your wanting to play through this injury.
Yeah.
But we really need you to take a couple.
Picture.
Do you take him out of the lineup entirely? He's the kind of a guy that 60% of him is better than a lot of guys that are 100%. So it's hard to kill the Tigers to say, or him too.
I agree with the damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. And it really is 20/20 hindsight of this thing.
Yeah.
But I think we're both in agreement that shut up and play ball now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because really the only people you see getting on Cabrera at this point, are the drunks at a stadium, and Twitter guys who have like 10 followers. Those are the type of people he's probably complaining about, because no one else is on his case about anything. And we get on his case occasionally, but like I said, when he's on the field, there's not a damn thing to bitch about when it comes to Miguel Cabrera.
Right.
All right. I guess we should mention that the MLB draft is tomorrow. The Tigers have the 1/1 pick, the first pick of the draft in the first round. From all accounts, going to be Casey Mize. I don't know a goddamn thing when it comes to amateur baseball, and I think pretty much the majority of the fans don't either. Reportedly, Mize is the standout. He's a right-handed pitcher out of Auburn. He's the standout prospect this year. Looks like the Tigers are going to go with that. And he seems to be the consensus number one guy. Yeah, I think the best thing I saw about that was a former GM who said, don't overthink the pick. If he's the best player on your board, you take him, regardless of position, regardless of need. So it looks, and we'll probably talk more about this on the next podcast when we have a better idea of what's gone down with the draft. But at the very least, the Tigers have a chance to land an impact player, which is something they've really been able to do in the draft over the past, I don't know how long. Well, I guess you could say at this point, Nick Castellanos is an impact player, but it took him a while to get to that point. After that, you probably have to go back to someone like Justin Verlander.
Right. Well, if they draft Mize, which it looks like, I would be shocked if they did not draft Mize at this point.
Yeah, I'm
with you. If they draft Mize, it's possible that we would see him in a Tigers uniform as early as next year. If he's as good as advertised, they would sign.
Saying he could go on. He's a middle rotation pitcher right now.
They would probably, if they drafted him, they would probably sign him and get him into Class A ball right away, and then probably maybe if there's time, he may bump him up to Erie Double A by the end of the year, and then come next spring, he's probably he's probably vying for
fight for rotation.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, if he's as good as ever, this is the way it goes now. I mean, this is the way it goes with pitchers, especially. Maybe not as much with position players, but with pitchers of this ilk, there's no real reason, unless you're just, have an embarrassment of riches in your rotation. There's no real reason to, if you feel like he's ready mentally, that's another one. If you really feel like he's ready up here, then, and if he's got all the physical tools, and he's going to be working with a guy like Chris Bosio, I don't know why you wouldn't have him in Lakeland next year, vying for a rotation spot.
Yeah. At the very worst, I would expect him to be up by the middle of next season.
Yeah.
But in a best case scenario, he's on the 25 man in next April. So if all works out, and here's hoping, and no injuries, and he's as good as advertised. All right, one more thing before we wrap it up, Greg. Any thoughts on the NHL finals or the NBA finals?
Not a whole lot. I haven't really watched a lot of either of them. I know that the game 2, or was it game 1, in the NBA, where they had the ridiculously long review at the end of regulation.
Yeah, it was. Essentially, they were reviewing it to make sure.
Bang bang.
A player was not in the restricted zone on a charge, they ended up changing the entire call. It was bizarre.
No,
it took like 5 minutes to do it.
But I think if anything, I would say, Al, is that I know there's a lot of LeBron James haters, and I guess that's what happens when you become a player of that ilk. You just, that's the way it is in this country. The higher you are on the pedestal, the more people want to knock you off that pedestal. But I don't know how you can look at. First of all, James has been in 8 straight finals. I don't remember Michael Jordan ever doing that. Right. Secondly, I don't remember Michael Jordan ever taking a team that was this unheralded.
Yeah.
Now they're without Kyrie Irving, and they ended up beating the team that has Kyrie Irving, by the way, to get the finals. I don't know how you can look at LeBron anymore at this juncture and say the guy's not better than
Michael Jordan. Put that team on his shoulders, literally.
He
put up 50 in game 1. And for them to win a game, he's probably going to over 60.
The fact that they're even in the finals with that supporting cast is unbelievable, frankly. Yeah. And so I don't know how at this juncture. To me, it's just jealousy at this point. Yeah. I mean, it's nitpicking and it's jealousy. Yeah. To look at LeBron James as anything other than certainly the best player in the game today, I think, and maybe one of the best players. Not maybe. He is one of the best players to ever play, and he's probably better than Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I don't think it's overstating that without LeBron James, the Cavaliers are probably fighting to stay out of the lottery.
Well, that's what happened when he left the first time.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as
when he went to Miami, they went right down the tubes. They won like 18 or 20 games.
Yeah.
And when he came back, they were back in the finals again. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't argue these are inarguable things. Now the NHL finals, I have to admit, I don't even know who won Game 3. Did Washington win?
Yeah, Washington's up 2-1.
Okay, all right. So they'll probably win that series.
What just gets me is the people thinking, oh, it's bad for the NHL if Vegas wins. I think it's great. You know, they literally will have a fan base that team, well, I would say this. Vegas is, I mean, the Golden Knights are going to own Vegas. Literally own Vegas. You know, and it's even more important when you got the Raiders coming to town in the next year or so. You know? I think with the NHL fans, the honest to goodness NHL fans, the ones that are going to be with the league no matter what. Right. I don't think they have a problem with Vegas making the finals. I think it's great. I mean,
I think the people, Al, that have a problem with it are either the fringe NHL fans or B, the non-NHL fans, period, who are looking at it from the outside and say, how could an expansion team make it to the finals and look at the NHL cross-eyed like, what do you got? What are you doing over there? What kind of a league do you have where a team that wasn't even in existence a year ago is now playing for the Stanley Cup? That's from those fringe fans or from the people from the outside who are looking at it strictly that way. But the fan of the NHL, I think, is fine with it. Because the NHL fan base, Al, has always been, to me, one that the whole notion of let's make the playoffs and see what happens. That's always been the mantra in the NHL, which is frankly one of the reasons why the Red Wings have been tardy in getting this rebuild started. But that's been the mentality of true NHL fans. Is I think if my team makes the playoffs, I think who knows what could happen. We could get a hot goalie, we could go on a run, we could get hot. And because it's happened over and over again. Yes, this year it's an expansion team, but this is just part of what the NHL is. It's about getting to the playoffs, and then anything can happen. And you've seen it on the other end where teams that have won the President's Trophy get knocked out in the first round. Yeah. You don't have that in the NBA. Right. You don't have these.
8 seeds don't win in the NBA.
No, it's just like it's like March Madness. Yeah. You hardly ever. So the NHL fan I think is all about it. The outsiders are like, whoa, whoa. And but hey, I think that, and here's the other thing. You mentioned Vegas the Golden Knights owning Vegas. Next year they might not even make the playoffs. Yeah. That's the way it is in the NHL. Next year they may not even make the playoffs. Yeah. You don't know.
Yeah. But I'll just say this, for all the people that say, oh, the NHL, it should be teams should have bigger fan bases, and it's such a great game. Why aren't more fans into it? Look at Las Vegas. More fans are getting into it there. It's the team, So I just say for the league to live, they need to have teams in some warm weather cities. Most of them have struggled. I mean, look at Phoenix.
Yeah.
So Vegas, awesome, great for them. Plus, they have a really smart general manager and coach who I think fleeced a lot of other GMs who were scared to death of losing certain players in the expansion draft. So the Vegas GM absolutely took them to town with taking certain players or taking draft picks in exchange for not picking certain players. It worked out great for them.
Remember last year at this time we were talking about who the Red Wings were going to protect, especially which goalie they were going to protect. Yeah. And then, of course, it ended up being Razek that was left unprotected. And the Golden Knights didn't bite on him. And look who they got, Marc-Andre Fleury, who ends up playing age 33, playing some of the best –
on his head.
Oh, playing some of the best hockey of his career. Yeah. You never see an expansion team, Al, especially between the pipes, get a player that's that good in their first year. I mean, never. Usually, expansion teams, that's the weakest point is your goaltending. And they get Marc-Andre Fleury, who's won a million Stanley Cups with the Penguins, and now here he comes in playing, like you said, standing on his head for the Golden Knights. He's the reason they're there. Yeah, frankly. Exactly. And, so in our old friend Gerard Gallant, the coach, who I don't know why he was let go by the Panthers a couple years ago.
It looks silly now.
The Panthers haven't I don't even know if they're still in the league.
Yeah, they might.
And look where Gallant is.
They might as well not be, really. And I'll say this about the NHL Finals. Yeah, it doesn't bother me who wins because Vegas has been a fun team to watch the whole thing. And if Alex Ovechkin wins his first cup, More power to him, because I don't think there's been many hockey players who've been through more playoff heartbreak than him.
Right.
The way the Capitals have flamed out in so many playoff series to finally the 2 games away from winning the cup. So Ovechkin wins it great. Vegas wins it great. I just want to see some good hockey, and so far it has been. All right, let's wrap this up, Greg. Who's your jerk of the week?
I'm not sure who to really give this jerk to. If it's baseball, or if it's the infielders in baseball, or if it's the umpires.
Oh, this sounds like big picture.
Well, it is big picture, and it's the slide into second base.
Ah, okay.
We are so we're trying to nitpick this slide into second base now. I know they've tried to legislate these slides, especially after the Chase Utley debacle a couple years ago. They're trying to legislate guys making these split-second decisions in sliding. And then we had an issue a week or so ago at home plate.
Yeah.
I think it was Rizzo. Slid into home plate, and that was a big to-do. But then they had a pitcher the other day, a pitcher for Pittsburgh, I think. It was against the Cubs. Slide in kind of late, a little late. This guy was like 7 feet tall, by the way. Yeah. Slid into second base a little late. But the base actually stopped his momentum, and he kind of hit the infield a little bit. And the infielder didn't like it. And my beef is, the reason it's a jerk of the week to me is that now we've constructed – now the infielders are becoming these petulant – or you can't – it's almost like you can't slide into them at all now. Yeah. I mean, I understand what they were trying to do with the rule, but this is an example of there are certain things that the more you try to legislate it – sometimes you create more problems than before you try to legislate.
Ask the NFL about the catch.
For a while, yeah. What's a touchdown for that matter?
Yeah.
When you start to try to take these kinds of plays that are guys are barreling down the line and they're in the moment. They're making these. First of all, these are plays that have been made for a million years anyway, and then you try to then say, okay, we're going to legislate. You may as well just I'm surprised they just didn't draw. They may eventually around second base some sort of a square, just like they do it in hockey with that trapezoid.
Right.
And it's something around the base that says, or every base, it says this is where you're. Now we've got these infielders who are taking umbrage at every single slide now, every single slide where they are made contact with. If they are made physically contacted with, they get all up in arms. Why? Because baseball has tried to legislate this. I don't remember infielders getting up in arms before this legislation.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, okay, Chase Utley made up bats. There's no question about it. Yeah. But how many times did that happen, number one? And number two, he was punished. But, I mean, you can't – it's just – I don't know. I don't know. It's to the point now where I don't know what's a good slide anymore and what's not. I know what the rule says, but I don't. Still, even with the rule, I just think these infielders are taking umbrage at every. If they're nicked and the leg, they look at the guy who's sliding in cross-eyed, and that Pirates Cubs thing I'm talking about. The bench is emptied. Yeah. It was a pitcher, and he said, "Look, that guy knows I'm not trying to hurt him. I'm just trying to break up a double play. It's a play that's been in baseball since time immemorial." He's right. So my jerk of the week, I guess, is MLB for a perfect example of trying to legislate something that really didn't need to be legislated to begin with.
Right. Yeah. Good call off that. It's it's getting to the point. Yeah. You don't know what's a good slide or what's allowed to be a good slide at this point. I really don't. All right. I'm going to go with the low hanging fruit. My jerk of the week is J.R. Smith of the Cavaliers.
Yeah.
Who, in Game 1 of the NBA Finals...
Didn't know the score was.
Didn't know the score. With 4.7 seconds left.
Right.
Didn't know the score. And after George Hill at the line, made the first, tied the game, missed the second. Smith makes a great play, rushes in, grabs the board, probably could have easily either put it back up or toss it out to the three-point line where LeBron James was standing.
Right.
Instead... he elects to dribble it out to the 3-point line. Then finally, I think when he gets the death stare from LeBron James, it's like, oh crap, it's a tie game, and so ultimately, they didn't get a shot off, and then they get blown out in overtime by the Warriors, and Little League. That is, we talked about fundamentals earlier. That is the most fundamental of fundamentals. You know the situation. When you're at that level of the game, in that important of a game, and you're not aware of what your situation is, J.R. Smith has a well-earned reputation as a knucklehead. That was just like the cherry on the top of his knuckleheadedness, of being a nincompoop. So my jerk of the week is J.R. Smith for being a nincompoop.
Good one, and Tyronn Lue didn't exactly defend him either, by the way.
No.
The game.
And the best shot was just LeBron James on with his eyes wide open, his jaw on the floor, and his arms just staring out. I'm like, what were you thinking? And then J.R. Smith made it worse by lying, essentially, that I was just trying to make a play. I knew what was going on. And then, of course, I believe today he admitted, as someone asked, he goes, I really couldn't tell you for sure what I was thinking. So he was a little more honest today about it.
Yeah, well.
But that just tells you the type of players LeBron James is having to put on his mighty wide shoulders at this point.
Right. At least Michael Jordan had Scottie Pippen, and he had outside shooters. He had he had some pieces. Don't kid yourself. I mean,
he had Will Perdue. Enough said.
I want to thank everybody for being here. Of course, we'll be back with you on June 17th, Father's Day. Al and I will have to talk about that.
We'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that. Maybe we'll record the show on the 16th. We'll see. But I do want to throw out there what we're trying to do is get Mick McCabe, our old friend Mick McCabe, on the show.
Mick McCabe, by the way.
Yeah, Mick McCabe was announced as one of the members of the 2018 Michigan Sports Hall of Fame class. He will be going in this fall or late summer, whenever that ceremony is. Mick, of course, has been with the Free Press since it started in 1970 until last year. He was in brief retirement. I say brief because he came out of retirement. He's already written several pieces since his retirement. I remember when he was on our show last year, and we asked him about retirement, and he didn't seem too enthused about retirement anyway.
Right.
And since then
he's been freelancing quite a bit.
He's been doing quite a bit of stuff, and so we're trying. I talked with him the other day, and he said try to make it work. We're looking at July 1st or the 15th for him.
Yeah, and
so stay tuned.
Then I can ask him, where is the Michigan Hall of Fame Sports Hall of Fame at anymore? Because last time I saw it, it was in some obscure hallway at Cobo Arena.
Right. Yes, fair.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get Mick on the show. So I want to thank my lovely wife Sharon for putting up with this stuff as we start season 10. Catch me on WordPress blog Out of Bounds, and also my Wing Wheeler hockey blog. At Greg Eno is the Twitter. At the Knee Jerks is our Twitter, and Facebook. You find us on Facebook. Just type in the Knee Jerks, and we'll show up there. And I'll let everybody know once again how you can find the podcast.
As always, thekneejerks.net will take you straight to the mothership, where you can find direct downloads and streams of our podcast straight from the host. Also, YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. Just search the Knee Jerks, and Big Al. Actually, probably the Knee Jerks would be more than enough. Where you can find you can subscribe, do whatever you want when it comes to downloading or watching or listening. So again, thekneejerks.net, YouTube, Stitcher, and iTunes. All right, let's start wrapping things up. So, I want to give a shout-out to my girlfriend Linda, who is obviously in the ER tonight saving lives and putting up with a lot of nincompoopery. And there's a lot of it in the world right now. Mm-hmm. With that, I want to give a shout-out to Greg for taking the time out of his busy weekend to talk sports with me. And also want to give a shout-out to the Pistons for giving us 45 minutes of content.
Yeah.
So, until... we'll be back sometime within probably the next couple of weeks. Where we'll just figure out what day it's going to land on, because Father's Day is already going to be our normal recording day. So until sometime around that time, this is Al Beaton saying good evening, good luck, and aloha.
Ciao, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.